This is the Wall Street update of World Business Report on Monday the 16th of February. I'm Dominic Laurie. The doors closed today on talks between Greece and its Eurozone partners over finding a solution to its financial future. There had been hopes this morning that the second round of talks in a week could find common ground, but they'd only barely got started when Athens rejected demands that it continue its massive debt bailout as absurd. Moods were hardened after the failed talks on both sides. The Maltese finance minister, for example, said Greece would face disaster if it didn't request a bailout extension. Jeroen Dijsselbloem, the top official representing the Eurozone countries, gave Greece an ultimatum. You must request an extension to the bailout by the end of this week. The Greek finance minister, though, Yanis Varoufakis, said there were substantial differences, but he was confident the impasse could be resolved.
We are ready and willing to do whatever it takes to reach an honourable agreement over the next 2 days. Our government will accept all the conditions that it can deliver upon and which not reinforce our society's crisis. No one has a right, not us, not any of our partners, to work towards an impasse, towards a dead end, especially one that is mutually detrimental for all Europeans.
Well, that's the Greek finance minister's view. Here's Frances Coppola, who's an associate editor at the economic website Pieria. I asked her where things stood now.
It all looks like an awful lot of sort of digging into trenches at the moment. Everybody's sort of adopting their positions that they were in before and refusing to budge. So Greece rejects the communiqué which committed them to everything that they've been required to do before, which they'd already rejected. And the Eurogroup responds by saying, well, we won't play then. I'm not sure how productive this was, to be honest. I don't think that it was much of a negotiation. I think it was more in establishing opening positions, really, more than anything else.
But it's an opening position, Francis, where there's a deadline now at the end of this week. It's too late for opening positions now, isn't it?
Not really. What are they going to do if Greece says no?
What's the option?
My feeling with this has always been that it would go to the wire. There'll be an agreement of sorts, of some kind, which would just avert defaults, and then we'll carry on playing brinkmanship and negotiations for a lot longer. That's, I think, how I think it will play out. That's how it played out before with other countries. That's how it played out in Cyprus. I don't see any reason why the Eurozone authorities would change their way of operating.
However, there has to be a vote in 4 national parliaments in other Eurozone countries in order for any change to the bailout agreement to be effected. So that is why. I mean, there is a reason why the Eurogroup is saying it has to be by the end of this week.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, the end of this week, the deadline is actually the 28th of February, which is not the end of this week.
However, the point that they're making is that there has to be 4 votes in a national parliament, so that's why they're saying the end of this week.
Yes, no, I understand they want to give themselves time to get those votes through. I mean, really, the negotiations will have to continue this week, and my feeling is that there will eventually be a deal of sorts. What I do want to say is that there's an awful lot of stuff going around the place about Greek exit, but as far as I can see, given the politics of the situation, I think it would be very unwise to assume that a Greek exit is on the table from either side. There's a lot of stuff here about, you can just kick them out. I don't think that's on the table. And equally from Greece's side, the consequences of exit would be very severe indeed.
Well, that's Frances Coppola's view. She's, to a certain extent, optimistic, or she certainly thinks that there's room to run in this road. But Peter Spiegel from the FT, he's been in Brussels waiting for an outcome. He was pretty disappointed, of course. He's a bit more gloomy. He says it's not just a battle of words, it's something more fundamental.
And this becomes very important for the Greeks in particular. Alexis Tsipras, the new prime minister, has gone before the parliament and says, I will not extend this current bailout. So if it's not extension, what is it? Is it a bridge? Is it a prolongation? And then who's going to monitor it? I mean, again, this word troika, for those who aren't familiar with it, is basically the name given to the 3 big international creditors in the bailout, the IMF, the European Commission, and the ECB. And it is vilified in Athens, particularly the IMF, that the troika shows up every quarter and starts going through your books, and they just hate it. And so they need to come up with a different name for that too. So
sounds like they need someone with a thesaurus, Peter.
Believe me, this is exactly what happened last week. I mean, the Troika is now called the institutions. The extension was called a bridge. I think the problem is many in the Eurozone thought it was just a matter of semantics. What the Greeks have made clear, and I think that's where the problem is it's not a matter of semantics. They actually want this current bailout to go away. They're ready to go to February 28th without a program in place. They're ready to go into the abyss, essentially, which has a lot of Eurozone officials very, very nervous because they think the markets are going to react very badly. And they also fear, which is another potentially more dangerous thing, is what happens to Greece's banks if there is no backstop. We've already seen in December and January where things got kind of bad, people pulling their money out of Greek banks and putting them to, elsewhere. And a bank run is potentially more dangerous than the government running out of money.
That's Peter Spiegel from the FT talking about what would happen if there was a bank run in Greece. A good person to talk to now then is Jeremy Batson-Carr from the stockbrokers Charles Stanley. Here's his take on events.
We're close to the watershed moment for Greece now. In order to give national parliament sufficient time to vote through any conclusions from this meeting, we pretty much have to have a decision.
Because there are 3 or 4 national parliaments, aren't there, in the Eurozone that actually have to change the bailout treaty.
Absolutely. And so even if you don't have the technical details, it was very much hoped that by the end of today's proceedings, there would be some form of heads of agreement that both sides could come to. This doesn't sound good. OK,
let's say that they play chicken with each other for another few days. I've got some share price graphs of Greek banks, 2 Greek banks, Alpha and National Bank of Greece in front of me. They've lost about 30% of their share capital since the beginning of January. Banks can't do that forever, can they, Jeremy?
By no means. Indeed, the great concern is that the Greek banks will run out of money once the ECB's emergency lending arrangement comes to an end on Wednesday, unless some form of extension is agreed. But the ECB is present in this meeting today, so doubtless they too will be all part and parcel of this talk suspension that you have been reporting.
Very briefly, who blinks first?
Looks like if anybody's going to blink first, it'll be the Europeans, but it will be masked as a mutual agreement.
Yep, there'll be some blinking at the end of this week and we'll follow it. We'll bring it to you here on the World Service. That's Jeremy Batson-Carr from Charles Stanley. Quickly, let's have a go through the market numbers. Actually, the Dow was closed today for a holiday, George Washington Day. So it was static at 18,019 all day. London, not really down an awful lot, even with the Greek shenanigans today. In Brussels, down just 0.2% at 6,857. New York light crude down 12 cents, trading about $53.50. And the dollar trading at 118.5 Japanese yen, and gold at $1,231 an ounce, round about where it's been for a while. You're listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Still to come, here's a topic you don't always hear in business programmes.
If somebody came into my house and put that kind of weight on my door, the washing machine, I'd be saying, hold on a minute, that's going to break it.
Find out why our man in South Korea is talking to us about washing machine wars in Germany. Now, it gets worse for Lance Armstrong, stripped of all 7 Tour de France titles, banned from cycling for life, charged a couple of weeks ago with leaving the scene of an accident and crashing into 2 parked cars. Now he's been fined $10 million for lying about using performance-enhancing drugs. Dallas-based Scar Promotions had paid millions of dollars in bonuses to Armstrong, but sued to get its money back after the disgraced cyclist admitted to doping. Cycling journalist Daniel Frieber told me what it was all about.
Scar Promotions was a company, effectively an insurer, that Armstrong and his team took out a policy with in the year 2000. And this is apparently quite common in American sports. A team can basically insure against the eventuality that they will win something and have to pay out a big bonus. In this case, Armstrong's team effectively took out insurance against the eventuality that he would win, and they would have to pay him several $1 million as a bonus. So what actually happened after 7 years of winning the Tour de France, Armstrong was effectively owed $10 million, or just over $10 million, by Scar Promotions, this insurer. However, as soon as Scar Promotions became aware of rumours, which eventually became more than rumours, that Armstrong had cheated, and they contested the fact that he had actually won these races. And then, of course, Armstrong confessed that he had cheated in January 2013, and Scar Promotions felt that they had a sort of watertight case against him, and they could effectively claim all of their money back.
How much of this is a precedent for other cases? Because there are many, many firms that will be thinking that they spent a lot of money on Lance Armstrong, backing Lance Armstrong, sponsorship, support, that was now wasted money. Is there a danger that even though this is big, $10 million, there could be more?
You say that it's wasted money. I mean, in a lot of cases, Armstrong lost sponsorship, for instance, Nike, Oakley, these big kind of blue chip sports brands. He lost that sponsorship. And it's interesting they haven't really pursued him for any damages because I think they're acutely aware of the fact that they got the exposure that they paid for. Okay, it was fraudulent, but they were quite happy that they got kind of bang for their buck. This is not the last legal challenge that Armstrong is facing. There's another case, what's called a whistleblower suit in the United States, which came about because the sponsor of his team, US Postal Service, is a state-owned company, so he effectively is accused of having defrauded the government. And this case was brought by one of his former teammates, Floyd Landis, and the fees being talked about in that case are even greater than they have been in this arbitration. It's tens of millions, talk of even 100 million. It's more likely that there'll be a settlement of a fraction of that amount of money, but it's certainly another major headache for Armstrong financially.
You've met Lance Armstrong and you know that he's somebody that wants to come back, and be accepted again in the public eye. He's, he wants to race again. But he keeps having this stuff come out that's bad news for him. Do you think that he's deluded in the fact that he might one day be able to sort of wipe the slate clean?
I think at the moment his priority is finding out really what his future is going to look like and knowing how much money he's going to lose, how much of his fortune he's going to lose. I mean, I don't think he's going to be destitute, but he's certainly going to lose, tens of millions. And he just wants to know what he can reinvent himself as, and what role he can have in the future, whether it's as a cancer fundraiser or as he was for a long time, this sort of champion of cancer survivorship, as he called it.
But his problem is that because his lie lasted so many years, it takes an awful lot of time for it to unwind, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, these legal cases will go on for presumably another year, 2, 3 years. So, that's obviously going to be very difficult to overcome.
You're having a golf round, I understand, with him in a few weeks' time. What advice will you give him?
What advice would I give him then?
Not about his golf, about how he comes to terms with his newfound situation.
I think he's fully aware that he needs to just weather the storm, and it's all about damage limitation now. But the sort of anti-Armstrong camp is sure that he wants to rehabilitate himself to the extent where he might, take up a role in politics or in cycling again. I'm not so sure about that. I think he just wants a relatively quiet, uncomplicated life compared to the one he's experienced over the last 2 years.
Whether he'll get it is another matter, of course. That's cycling journalist Daniel Freber telling me about Lance Armstrong's $10 million fine today.
Accept all the conditions that it can deliver upon and which not reinforce our society's crisis. No one has a right, not us, not any of our partners, to work towards an impasse, towards a dead end, especially one that is mutually detrimental for all Europeans.
Well, that's the Greek finance minister's view. Here's Frances Coppola, who's an associate editor at the economic website Pieria. I asked her where things stood now.
It all looks like an awful lot. Nothing else.
But it's an opening position, Francis, where there's a deadline now at the end of this week. It's too late for opening positions now, isn't it?
Not really. What are they going to do if Greece says no?
What's the option?
My feeling with this has always been that it would go to the wire. There'll be an agreement of sorts, of some kind, which would just avert defaults, and then we'll carry on playing brinkmanship and negotiations for a lot longer.
This is the Wall Street update of World Business Report on Monday the 16th of February. I'm Dominic Laurie. The doors closed today on talks between Greece and its Eurozone partners over finding a solution to its financial future. There had been hopes this morning that the second round of talks in a week could find common ground, but they'd only barely got started when Athens rejected demands that it continue its massive debt bailout as absurd. Moods were hardened after the failed talks on both sides. The Maltese finance minister, for example, said Greece would face disaster if it didn't request a bailout extension. Jeroen Dijsselbloem, the top official representing the Eurozone countries, gave Greece an ultimatum. You must request an extension to the bailout by the end of this week. The Greek finance minister, though, Yanis Varoufakis, said there were substantial differences, but he was confident the impasse could be resolved.
We are ready and willing to do whatever it takes to reach an honourable agreement over the next 2 days. Our government will...
Of sort of digging into trenches at the moment. Everybody's sort of adopting their positions that they were in before and refusing to budge. So Greece rejects the communique which committed them to everything that they've been required to do before, which they'd already rejected. And the Eurogroup responds by saying, well, we won't play then. I'm not sure how productive this was, to be honest. I don't think that it was much of a negotiation. I think it was more in establishing opening positions, really, more